Hello, I'm Dr. Shahram Izadyar. I'm an adult epileptologist, subspecializing in epilepsy and treating epilepsy and seizures. I work at Upstate University, and I run the epilepsy program there. So today talk is about epilepsy treatment pipeline and getting involved in clinical trials as a title. So we are going to talk about what clinical trials are, what new treatments might be available down the road for epilepsy, and how to get involved in clinical trials for those who are interested. Um, so I want to first have a bit of overview of what it is a um, process of developing new treatments and particularly new medications or other types of treatment. So in order for a new treatment or a new drug to develop, there are several steps and several phases that I'm going to kind of explain them a bit. First is the discovery and preclinical research part. So this is before any clinical test on the medication is done. So during this phase, this is basically where the scientists work in their labs in different ways to look or work on different chemicals, compounds, or devices and test them in various ways. Sometimes they're just lab tests, sometimes may involve some sort of animal experiments. And in order to do that, again, is to find if the new treatment or potentially new treatment or device, whether it works at all, and if it does, if it's safe in as far as can be investigated in the lab environment. So after this phase, only treatments that show some potential for effectiveness and they're safe, then they move forward to human studies, and that's what the clinical trials are. The process of each phase, including the discovery and preclinical research, that can take several years before a treatment is ready for clinical trials. So that's a long process. I mean, this developing new treatments takes time and investment. So clinical trials are in most part divided in three main phases before they can be approved and come to basically market to be available to public for treatment. So phase one is where participants are a small group of patients. Something can range between like 20 to 100 again. So there's no set number, but I mean, in that range, small groups. And these are patients who volunteer to be participating in this phase one of the drug development. So the focus of phase one usually is on safety, whether, again, there are any potential side effects, if there is anything that is considered to be concerning for the medication and things like that. So it focuses on safety. And also the other part is side effects, what potential side effects of the medications are potentially there. And when we talk about the safety and side effects, again, they're very related, but also we are in the lens of short-term or long-term side effects. So these are things that we pay attention to in phase one clinical trials. And also another part that is looked at in this phase one is how the medication is processed in the body. In other words, the kind of the scientific term of that is pharmacodynamic, or pharmacokinetic of the medication. So pharmacodynamic, so how it's processed in the body, how it is metabolized, how does it get out of the body, what is the concentration of the medication in the blood after it's taken, what is the peak time of that concentration after medication is taken. So these are the questions that are tried to be answered in phase one of the clinical trials. And as I mentioned, these are usually involves either healthy volunteers or sometimes patients who volunteer to take these medications. But again, it's not uncommon to have healthy volunteers to participate in phase one. They don't necessarily need to have that specific disease that is the target of this medication. In our talk is focused obviously on epilepsy and seizures. So they don't have necessarily need to have seizures to participate. And then comes phase two. Phase two then goes, so after basically I guess a positive or a successful results are obtained from phase one, whether there's no major concern about the safety or side effects of them, and we have some information about how the drug is processed, then it goes to phase two. So in phase two, usually again, it's a larger group of participants, can range between 100 to 300, again, approximately. This is considered a larger group. So the tests that are done during this phase two is whether it checks the effectiveness of treating epilepsy and continues to monitor the safety of the medication. And also it determines what is the best dose of the medication. Usually in phase two, there are different arms of the participants, like they are divided into, let's say, just for an example, like medication that is tried, and the dose can be something between 20 milligrams a day to 60 milligrams a day. You can just for an example. And then the participants are divided, for example, to three arms, whether like one takes 20 milligram, one group takes 40 milligram, one group takes 60 milligram, and then they will compare what is the effectiveness of each arm or effectiveness of the medication in each arm, and what is the potential side effects. Is the higher dose necessarily better? Is it concerns for more side effects with higher dose and so on? So these are questions that is tried to be answered in phase two. And then again, if the positive results um, are obtained in phase two, again, they're considered to be relatively safe and effective, then things move to phase three. Phase three, then it's a large group of participants. It's usually over a few hundreds, sometimes can be a few thousands even participants, depending on the medication, depending on the goals of the study. This can change. And these are lots of times, depending again of the specific medication or device, but lots of times these are multi-central trials, meaning in different academic centers usually, or even sometimes private centers participate in these larger phase three studies. They enroll patients who might be interested and eligible for this study. So it's a multi-central across the country, different centers, or even sometimes it is a kind of a international clinical trial. So different multi-centers from across the globe. Some centers from the U.S., some centers from Europe, some from Asia or different parts of the globe might be participating. So in phase three, typically, the effectiveness of the medication is compared to standard treatments or to placebo. And placebo, again, as you know, it's a term that is used for basically quote unquote fake medication, and or sometimes it's a common term to refer to that as sugar pills, basically. So they are uh, mm, pills that looks exactly like the original medication, but they do not contain the active ingredients. So there are some inactive ingredients, such as glucose or so on. So during this test, during this phase, more information is collected on effectiveness and side effects of the medications. Um, and participants are usually again divided into different arms, similar to phase two that we talked about, maybe different arms of different doses. In this phase three, typically one of the arms is the participants who are in the placebo arm or placebo group, and the other groups actually receive the medication, and then the effect of the medication is followed, whether the seizure frequency has changed, whether the severity of them has changed, and so on. So these information are collected. Lots of studies tried the phase three to be a double-blinded, um, placebo-controlled study. So what does that mean, double-blinded? Meaning that both sides of this study are blinded to what the participant is receiving in terms of whether they're receiving the placebo or they're receiving the actual active ingredient pill. So the participant doesn't know which arm they belong to. The center that administers these pills, they do not also know. So this is why it's called a double blinded. So the participant is blinded to what arm they are into, and the center that administers this trial also is blind to that. I mean, this data is somewhere, like the sponsors of the trials usually, I mean, which is usually again for the medications manufacturers of the medications, or in terms of devices, manufacturer of the device, which is a bit different in terms of devices, how that double blind work. But they have that information again, some were safe, but the participant, let's say again, for example, I work again at Upstate. We are one of the centers that participate in some of these clinical multi-central or multi-center clinical trials. And when someone enrolls in our center and we give them a medication, we don't know whether they're receiving the actual treatment or the placebo. So in order, and then the reason for that is to the studies that are blinded, or even better, double blinded, are more reliable, the results, because there's no effect of kind of the placebo effect is called. That's eliminated. Um, so they're more robust results, more reliable. This is kind of the standard these days. I think new medications by phase three that are double-blind controlled studies. So again, these are prior to approval. So, and then the results of these phases, or especially phase three, these are the data and the information that are submitted by the manufacturers to FDA, Food and Drug Administration, to get actually be reviewed and then eventually get approval. Again, the main question is the medication effective? Is it safe? So this is kind of a, again, graph or cartoon to summarize the phases of development of treatments, new treatments that we talked about. Again, the discovery phase, again, lots of lab work, maybe even gene identification, understanding the mechanisms of the disease and so on, identifying the target. Then the preclinical phase, again, that might be lots of, again, lab work, might involve some, lab work or animal models. Then it's submitted to a new drug application to FDA that, hey, we have this new medication It's still in the preclinical phase. These are the data, and we want to start a clinical trial in human. And then FDA reviews that data and make sure that they are relatively safe, and then approves the clinical trial. And then the clinical trial goes on phase one, phase two, phase three, as we talked about. Again, as you see, as it advances, the participants become larger, and then this data eventually is submitted to FDA for approval. So that's what we were talking about. So FDA regulation and approval. Again, FDA carefully examines the evidence that to ensure the treatment is safe and effective. The review process may include like the expert advisory committee meetings in the FDA. So there are again a large group of scientists, clinicians, experts sit on these committees and review the information. They may even ask the public for comments. So there's a public comment period. So they may release some prelim data information about that. I mean, it's not for every medication or every device, but it can include sometimes soliciting comments or opinions from public about some aspects of that treatment. And after reviewing that, FDA may kind of get back to the manufacturer submitting a party and ask them for additional data if they see the data is not enough or is not adequate enough to convince FDA. They may ask for more data. And in that sense, sometimes then the manufacturer needs to go back and do maybe another kind of phase three, or kind of repeat that, or somehow collect some data that the FDA asked for them. So only after FDA approval, then the new drug or device can be prescribed to patients. Now, keep in mind again that these trials have their own specific criteria in order to be eligible to participate, and then I'll again mention that in the some of the upcoming slides. All right. So why it is important in general, why are clinical trials important? So again, they're very essential for medical progress. Again, so new treatments, new mechanisms, new discoveries. I mean, these are essential parts in order to get new medications available to public and then to patients. For medical progress, it helps discover new and better treatments for epilepsy. They ensure that the new therapies are safe and effective before they reach the public. So clinical trials, again, and it provides that information. And without really clinical trials, we would not have the medications and devices that we have available to us today. So it's an essential part of medical advancement and progress. So what is the benefit if someone has that condition that the clinical trial is going on again? In our case today, that our focus of our talk is epilepsy and seizures. So what is the benefit of someone with epilepsy and seizure wants to participate in clinical trials? So first is access to new treatments that are not yet not only widely available, but not available at all in most instances. So these are new mechanisms, new discoveries that those patients might be interested in to try that as a firsthand and get to new exposure, because again, all those phases takes years. I mean, as we talked, these may take years and years. I mean, 10, 15, sometimes even longer for a medication eventually to get approval from the discovery point to the release point. So that's one advantage. During that clinical trial, their patients are usually, or participants are closely monitored. So they have several visits involved in these clinical trials, especially phase three. So they get the medication, they come for frequent visits. During the visits, they are examined, they have lab works to do. So they're closely monitored, and they have access to medical professionals, basically readily available to them if they have any questions, if they have any potential side effects, any anything that comes up, they can have a very close access to them. And last but not least is really a contribution to research and well-being of our community in general. So basically, it's an opportunity to not only benefit individually, but get back basically to community and help the research and advancing medicine and science for helping the patients better in the future. And in some clinical trials, may even some extra services or resources be available to participants, again, depending on what medication or devices in the trial, they may have extra advantage. But I mean, it comes also potentially with some disadvantage and risks from participating in clinical trials. Again, we know that new treatments may have some unknown effects or risks, but again, there's some preclinical work has been done in animal models and so on, so they have some sort of like an idea of what potential dangers or side effects might be before getting to clinical trials. Treatments may not work for everybody. Again, some participants may take and then participants may require more frequent, again, as we said, visits and tests and procedures may be scheduled once a month or every 4 months, 6 months. And also the duration of participation in phase 3 is typically between 4 weeks to 8 weeks. So during those times, few weeks, again, the patients are randomized to be in the placebo arm or the actual medication arm. But after that, 4 to 6 weeks or 8 weeks again, or 10 weeks again, depending on the medication, it's usually a limited number of weeks. Then there are lots of studies that is considered an open label extension. So that's the usually, if there is some benefit during that randomized phase, which they don't know, again, we are blinded, they are blinded, if they are in a placebo arm or um, or the actual medication arm, if they see some effectiveness of that, then they can enroll in the open label extended study, which provides the actual medication. There's no placebo in that part and they get actually the medication. Because again, the process of approval takes years. So they have access to that medication after that randomized phase 3 with open label extension or OLE phase. Um, and another disadvantage might be, again, most trials covers all the costs by the manufacturer. It provided even for the commute of the patients, for the visits and tests and all that. But occasionally there may be studies that not cover all the costs. And not only that, again, some studies, however, again, having said that, some trials offer even compensations for the patient's participation. So just now that we have a good grasp of what is a clinical trial, just want to just list a few medications that are in pipeline. Again, I don't want to focus on a particular trial or a particular medication, but these are some new medications that are in pipeline. For example, again, acetylcholine, this is a medication that works on potassium channels, which is kind of fairly new. None of the current available medications works on potassium channels. So this was in phase 3. The study actually just closed enrollment for focal epilepsy, but it still is enrolling for generalized epilepsies. And our center is one of the centers that is participating in that. So it's still enrolling for generalized epilepsy. Padzivonil is another medication that works, again, another mechanism of action that is still in phase 3. Soticlestat is another medication, again, works with different mechanisms. So there are a bunch of, again, medications in pipeline. Ganaxolone is another medication that is already approved for tuberous sclerosis, a particular type of cause of epilepsies, but other types of epilepsy now still continues to have phase 3. Again, there are some other medications and compounds that is undergoing clinical trials. Okay, so now other than medications, I'm going to wrap up in a few minutes. There are other ways of also treating epilepsy. For example, neuron transplant, GABAergic cell therapy. So basically, these are transplanted interneurons. Basically, they're derivatives of stem cells that transplanted into the brain. They migrate, they mature, and become part of the brain network, and they can help with the seizure control. Basically, they restore the inhibitory circuits of the brain to control the seizures and reduce the excitability of the brain. So one example of that again is the clinical trial that is called by and implanting these um, derivatives of stem cells. So these are usually, at this current time, they're used for temporal lobe epilepsies, especially the ones that are involved, the mesial temporal lobe, or what is called MTS. So there are different studies in phase one or phase two, or some of them is going to phase three already. So these are important. And there are other types of therapy in pipeline. There are gene therapies. So it aims to fix or replace the faulty genes that is causing the epilepsy. So basically, these healthy genes are provided to the brain cells by different vectors or carriers. So, for example, harmless viruses that can carry this to the brain and replace the non-functioning or ill-functioning genes with healthy genes. Um, so these are usually effective again with patients who have epilepsies related to genetic causes, such as Dravet syndrome, for example. So these are very early in this stage of development. There's a long way to go for the gene therapies. So I just wanted to now mention that. Now, wrap things up, how to get started with clinical trials. If someone is interested, talk to your neurologist, to your community neurologist, whether they are aware of any clinical trial that may be going on and might be right for you. Ask your, local hospital, your epilepsy centers that are close to you if there is any trials that is specifically targets your condition. Search for epilepsy trials. There is a website, clinicaltrials.gov.gov. So it lists all the clinical trials that is going under in this country. So that can be kind of browsed and see if there's anything can be found. Epilepsy Foundation, again, EPI, for example, they might be aware of some clinical trials that they can direct you to. Um, so you may need to meet certain criteria to join any specific clinical trial. Not all patients who are interested meet those criteria. And again, those specifics will be provided to interested participants before, again, enrollments. And again, participation is always voluntary for these clinical trials, can leave the trial at any time if they wish to. So I think that was all I had. So an overview of the clinical trials and how we can basically get involved. And I think well,